proving that the medical care you're receiving is, like, actively harming you.
Right.
You bring all the documentation, you point to the actual guidelines,
Yeah.
and you just calmly lay out the facts.
You do everything right, basically.
Exactly. And your reward for being objectively right, well, you get locked in a psychiatric ward.
I mean, it sounds like a dystopian novel, honestly.
It really does.
But according to the stack of research we're unpacking today, it's a documented procedural reality for people who ask the wrong questions.
Yeah, so welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a collection of sources that suggest the modern push for mental health awareness might actually be a trap.
And a really effective one at that.
Right, like one of the most effective traps modern institutions have ever built. We are working through a dense, really provocative stack of materials here.
Yeah, we have academic frameworks, legal analyses of UK law, historical data.
And some deeply personal, frankly harrowing case studies.
The central premise we're exploring is just profound. I mean, we live in a society that constantly preaches at us to speak up.
Yes, like speak your truth.
Exactly. End the stigma. Reach out for help.
You see it on billboards and, corporate HR emails, literally everywhere.
But the sources we're dissecting today reveal a saddening, really hidden reality for you, the listener.
Right. They argue that if your opinions or your lived experiences don't perfectly align with the narrative set by institutions.
And we're primarily using the UK as our laboratory here, just to be clear.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't align, the system does not help you.
Yeah.
It actually actively suppresses you.
Which is terrifying.
It is. We are going to explore how opinions based on genuine lived experience are routinely crushed by what the author of these sources calls the institutional web.
And what makes this material so compelling is that it moves way past standard complaints about bureaucracy.
Right, because we all know red tape is annoying. That's obvious.
Yeah, but this goes much deeper. It presents a documented evolutionary framework explaining the actual mechanics of power.
It explains why systems seem to automatically target whistleblowers, like the truth tellers.
And crucially, it doesn't just leave you with a bleak diagnosis of society.
No, thank goodness.
Right. It lays out a roadmap for developing what the author calls mental fitness.
Which is like a way to upgrade your own psychological operating system to actually survive this environment.
So let's start with the language itself, because to understand why people are punished for speaking out, we have to look at the words.
Yeah, how human suffering has been fundamentally relabeled.
Exactly. The author of these sources actually refuses to use the term mental health.
Wait, really? They just boycott the phrase entirely?
Pretty much. They argue those specific words have been historically weaponized, to pathologize difference and just silence dissent.
Oh, wow. I guess if you think about the history of medicine as a tool for social control.
It's a long, dark corridor.
It really is. The sources remind us that homosexuality was officially classified as a mental illness in the DSM until 1973.
Right. It wasn't just frowned upon socially. It was literally a clinical pathology requiring a medical cure.
Which is wild to think about now. And we can go back even further. Look at the 19th century.
Oh, with hysteria.
Yeah. Women who refused to conform to, like, highly restrictive, submissive social roles were routinely diagnosed with hysteria.
They were institutionalized just for wanting independence.
Exactly. Or look at the American South before the Civil War. A physician named Samuel Cartwright actually invented a psychiatric diagnosis.
Right. I remember reading this in the sources, drapetomania.
Yes. The supposed mental illness that caused enslaved black people to want to flee captivity.
And the cure for that supposed illness was whipping.
It is absolutely horrifying to look back on.
It is. But the power dynamic is super clear.
Right. If someone's perfectly rational desire for freedom or autonomy threatens the economic
or the social order, yeah.
The system doesn't debate them. It diagnoses them.
It turns a valid opinion or a natural human drive into a biological defect.
And the sources argue this isn't just ancient history. It's just been industrialized now.
Yeah, the author points to some staggering statistics regarding the UK.
The numbers are insane. Antidepressant prescriptions have doubled in the past 15 years.
Doubled. Just think about that.
In England alone, there were over 89 million prescriptions issued in 2021.
Let's put that number into perspective for a second. The population of England is roughly 56 million people.
So we are talking about an astronomical volume of medication.
Yeah. The argument presented here is that this massive scale of medicalization creates intense dependency.
It generates billions in revenue, basically.
Exactly. Billions. But it does not produce healing.
Which really begs the question, what are we actually medicating?
And that brings us to one of the most illuminating concepts in the text, the fire alarm theory.
I love this analogy. Break it down for us.
So the authors suggest that what we call emotional distress, like severe anxiety, depression, a feeling of total overwhelm, it's essentially a psychological fire alarm.
Okay, so it's a signal.
Right. It's an intelligent, highly evolved signal from your nervous system telling you that your environment is dangerous or toxic or unsustainable.
But the current therapeutic response functions, well, completely backwards.
Exactly. Imagine you're sitting in your living room. The house is actively on fire.
And the fire alarm is blaring, as it should be.
Right. The institution walks in, completely ignores the flames licking the walls, looks at the alarm, and decides the alarm is the problem.
So they just disconnect it.
Or muffle it, yeah. Just to help you better tolerate the fact that you are sitting in a burning building.
The author calls this a profound betrayal of the evolutionary signal.
It is a betrayal because it completely invalidates reality. I mean, the smoke is real, the heat is real.
But the intervention focuses entirely on silencing your reaction to it.
Right.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second, though. Isn't medicine supposed to put out the fire?
What do you mean?
Like, if you're physically sick, you take a pill to get better. If my brain chemistry is out of whack, shouldn't I take something to fix it?
I see where you're going with that.
It just seems harsh to say doctors are essentially just disconnecting alarms.
Ooh, let's adapt the metaphor slightly to address that. Imagine you are coughing violently every single day at work
Okay.
because your office building has a faulty ventilation system that's pumping in toxic smoke.
So the environment is the actual problem.
Yes. You go to the building manager, coughing your lungs out and say, the air in here is poisoning me.
Right, you're raising a valid concern based on your lived experience.
Exactly. But instead of fixing the ventilation, the building manager sends you to accompany a doctor.
He probably diagnoses you with something, right?
Yes. They diagnose you with chronic coughing disorder. They give you heavy cough suppressants.
So your cough goes away. You actually feel better.
But you go right back to work in the smoke.
Ah. So the symptom is managed, but the actual cause of the harm is completely ignored?
And look at what happened to the accountability in that scenario.
Right, the building manager gets off scot-free.
Exactly. By medicalizing the trauma, by diagnosing you with a disorder, the institution successfully shifts the blame.
They shift it from society, or the toxic workplace, directly onto you, the individual.
You have the faulty alarm. You are the patient.
Wow. So the conditions causing the distress, like poverty, failing social safety net, institutional abuse, they just become invisible.
It totally lets the system off the hook.
The building manager never has to pay for the expensive ventilation repairs because the problem is just your defective lungs.
Precisely. Medicalizing distress protects the status quo.
But wait, disconnecting an alarm takes effort. It takes a coordinated system.
It does.
So who is actually holding the wire cutters here?
And this leads us directly into the core architecture of the author's work, what they call the institutional web.
Right. The sources describe a highly interconnected network in the UK.
We're talking about the National Health Service, the NHS, the military, the police.
The family courts, social services, and bureaucratic agencies like the Child Maintenance Service.
The central thesis is that this web operates primarily to control populations and protect itself from liability.
Rather than to actually cure or support citizens.
Exactly.
The text maps out a very specific documented pattern for how this web operates. They call it the 6-stage criminalization process.
It is a cycle of abandonment, really. It takes a victim of systemic failure and systematically transforms them into a criminalized perpetrator.
It's fascinating, but honestly terrifying to read through. Because once you see the pattern, you start recognizing it everywhere.
Let's walk through these 6 stages deeply, because this is where the theory really hits the pavement.
Yeah, we need to understand exactly how someone goes from seeking help to being destroyed by the system.
So stage 1 is institutional failure. This is the catalyst.
It's a breach of the duty of care.
Yes. The institution neglects, harms, or abandons the individual, which creates trauma.
So practically speaking, this could be a hospital discharging a severely vulnerable patient onto the street without any care plan.
Or it could be the military totally ignoring a soldier's reports of severe bullying. It's an objective failure of the system to do its job.
Okay, then comes stage 2, natural response.
Right. The individual reacts to that failure.
They experience emotional distress. They might protest loudly.
They might write angry emails demanding answers, or they might just become totally withdrawn and hypervigilant.
And the crucial point the author makes here is that this response is completely rational.
Yes. If you are abandoned by a system you desperately rely on for survival, anger or panic is an intelligent, adaptive response.
You're just trying to protect yourself.
Exactly. But then we hit the pivot point. Stage 3.
Pathologization.
Right. The system looks at that natural, rational reaction and slaps a medical label on it.
They don't say, oh, this person is angry because we failed them.
No, never. They say, this person has a personality disorder, or they have an emotional regulation deficit.
Let's think about how this actually happens in the mind of a bureaucrat or a social worker.
Yeah, picture them sitting in a sterile office, totally overwhelmed by huge caseloads.
An individual comes in, deeply traumatized by stage 1, displaying all the raw emotions of stage 2.
And the professional doesn't have the time or resources to fix the systemic failure. So, relying on their training, they just look at the distress and categorize it.
The moment they write borderline personality traits or anxiety disorder in the file, the entire power dynamic shifts.
Which perfectly sets up stage 4, system justification.
This is where the magic trick happens, right?
Exactly. Now that the individual has a pathology attached to their official file, the institution can completely reverse the blame.
The initial failure from stage 1 is just erased from the narrative.
Poof. Gone. The institution can now say, well, we couldn't help them because their case is too complex.
Or, we tried to offer support, but they were non-compliant due to their severe mental illness.
The institution's objective failure is retroactively justified by the individual's brand new diagnosis.
That is incredibly insidious. The very reaction to the abuse is used as proof that the person deserved the abuse.
For at least that the abuse wasn't the institution's fault.
Right, which leads to stage 5, escalate and control.
Because the person is now officially labeled as disordered, irrational, or non-compliant, the interventions intensify.
At this stage, the individual is usually realizing what is happening, right? So they fight back harder.
Yes, which the system, of course, views as further proof of their pathology.
So the escalating control can take many forms. It could be service exclusion.
Where the NHS just drops them from care entirely, labeling them untreatable.
Or it can swing the other way into extreme coercion, like forced medication or threats of being sectioned under mental health laws.
And finally, we reach the terminal point. Stage 6. Criminalization.
This is where the victim is effectively eliminated from the system.
And elimination here means the threat they pose to the institution's reputation or resources is neutralized.
They might be literally imprisoned.
They might be driven to suicide by the relentless pressure.
Or, if they are professional whistleblowing from inside the system, they are professionally destroyed, financially ruined, and blacklisted.
The system essentially cleanses itself.
Hearing this laid out so mechanistically, I really have to stop and ask, how coordinated is this?
It's our question.
I mean, are we really suggesting there is a smoke-filled room in Whitehall where sinister bureaucrats are actively plotting to destroy regular citizens?
Right. Calling a bureaucracy an evolutionary predator feels a bit hyperbolic to some people.
Yeah, are we really saying the NHS is hunting people like a lion on the savannah?
It's a vital question to clarify. The sources are very careful about this. They do not posit a shadowy comic book conspiracy.
Okay, so what is it then?
It is actually much more terrifying than a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Because it is totally automatic. The author frames this as institutional self-preservation.
Okay, so what does that mean in practice?
Think of a massive institute like a biological organism. Organisms have immune systems.
Right, and an immune system doesn't hold meetings. It just reacts to stimuli.
Exactly. A bureaucracy is designed with one overarching prime directive to maintain control, manage risk, and protect its own funding and reputation.
So when an individual stands up and demands accountability, or points out a massive failure with evidence,
they are acting as an external irritant. They are a pathogen.
So the system's immune response just triggers automatically.
Yes. The system doesn't hate the individual personally. It simply recognizes a threat to its equilibrium.
The social workers, the lawyers, the administrators, they are essentially the white blood cells.
That's a great way to put it. They use the tools at their disposal, which are policies, diagnoses, and legal threats, to isolate, neutralize, and expel the threat.
So the system functions exactly as designed.
Precisely.
So there's no malice required, just an adherence to procedure.
Yeah,
That is chilling.
it really is.
Yeah.
Because you can't reason with an immune
No,
response.
you can't. If a white blood cell decides you are an infection, your opinion on the matter is completely irrelevant.
And that biological analogy leads us directly to the next massive concept in the text, the danger of speaking up.
We've seen how the institutional web operates. Now we need to look at who gets caught in it.
Right. Why does having an opinion based on your lived truth make you a target?
The author actually extends Darwinian evolution to explain this, which I found just fascinating.
It is a totally radical framework.
Yeah.
The proposition is that modern institutions act as an evolutionary selection pressure.
Like in nature, a predator hunting prey forces the prey to adapt, to evolve speed or camouflage or armor.
In our modern world, the institutional web is the apex predator, and it forces psychological adaptation upon the population.
But the text identifies a specific two-tier selection system at play, and it creates a horrific paradox for human development.
Let's look at the 2 tiers. Tier 1 consists of what the author calls compliant survivors.
Who are they?
These are the individuals who, when faced with institutional failure, accept the pathology narrative.
They internalize the blame.
Yes. They sit in the doctor's office and say, "You're right, I am broken. My brain chemistry is faulty. I have a disorder."
And how does the system treat them?
The system tolerates them. In fact, it needs them.
Because they're medicated, managed, and kept perpetually dependent.
Exactly. They don't challenge the fundamental structure of the institution, so they aren't a threat.
Instead, they become a permanent revenue source for the pharmaceutical industry.
And the primary justification for the bureaucracy's continued funding and existence.
But Tier 2 is where the selection pressure becomes incredibly hostile.
Right. These are the conscious resistors.
These are individuals who have conscious regulatory tools. They refuse the pathology narrative entirely.
When the system fails them, they don't internalize it as a personal defect. They expose the institutional failure.
These are your truth tellers, your whistleblowers.
The people who say, "I am not disordered, your clinic is incompetent."
And how does the immune system react to that?
It attacks viciously.
And here's the evolutionary paradox the author points out.
Yeah, this is the really sad part.
The traits that define a conscious resistor: integrity, high-level pattern recognition, courage, the ability to articulate complex truths.
A strong sense of justice, too.
Right. These are the very traits that represent human evolutionary advancement.
But in the modern institutional web, possessing these traits makes you a primary target for destruction.
So the system is actively selecting against consciousness. It's actively weeding out the smartest, most aware people.
Because consciousness is dangerous to a system that relies on blind compliance.
I need to understand the human element of this, though. I understand the immune system analogy on a macro level.
Okay, let's zoom in.
But on a micro level, why does a single social worker or a community doctor or a local police officer suddenly turn on someone just because they point out a systemic flaw?
It's a great question. Because these are usually people who got into their professions to help others, right?
Exactly. They are villains.
The text provides a brilliant psychological explanation for this, using concepts called the people-pleasing protocol and role fusion.
Break those down for me.
Institutions inherently demand fawning and compliance from both their employees and their patients.
There's a strict hierarchy.
Yes. So when a trauma-affected individual is sitting in, say, a multidisciplinary team meeting surrounded by a psychiatrist, a social worker, and a care coordinator.
And that individual uses collective systemic language.
Right. They say, "Your team failed to send the referral," or "This hospital's policy is causing me harm."
They're making a factual observation about the system.
Exactly. But the professionals in that room experience role fusion.
Meaning they've psychologically fused their personal moral identity with their job title and the institution they work for. So it's like when you critique a movie and the person who loves that movie takes it as deeply personal insult to their own character.
It's exactly like that, but with terrifying stakes.
Right, because here, the person taking offense has the legal authority to institutionalize you.
They cannot separate their ego from the badge they wear or the clinic they represent.
So when the patient critiques the system, the professional hears a personal moral attack.
Their own nervous system gets triggered, they go on the defensive immediately.
And instead of looking at the facts, they use their institutional power to silence the trigger.
Yes. They immediately label the truth teller as difficult, aggressive, lacking insight, or high conflict.
This pathologizes the patient's valid opinion and protects the fragile ego of the professional.
Wow. So the professional's inability to separate themselves from their job basically turns them into a weapon of the web.
That brings it right down to the human level. It makes perfect, terrifying sense.
And we have to emphasize this isn't just an abstract philosophical theory.
No, not at all.
The most impactful part of these sources is the evidence. The author provides extensive, deeply documented case studies of UK citizens.
Citizens whose opinions and truths led to them being systematically crushed by this exact mechanism.
I want to be very clear to you listening right now.
Yeah.
We are going to walk through these case studies exactly as they are presented in the sources.
Yes, we are not taking political sides here, left or right. We are impartially examining the mechanics of institutional power and control, as documented by the author.
Let's look at the first case study. Frankie?
Frankie's case is presented as a 5-year documentation of systematic institutional destruction.
She is described as a trauma survivor who, out of sheer necessity to protect herself, actually learned the UK Mental Health Act better than the doctors who were treating her.
Which makes her a Tier 2 conscious resistor.
Exactly. She understood her rights perfectly.
And because her intelligence, her legal knowledge, and her insistence on evidence-based care challenged the authority of her clinicians, she was actively targeted.
The role fusion we just talked about was on full display here. The clinicians felt threatened by a patient who literally knew more than they did.
The details in the text are shocking. The sources actually include references to audio transcripts.
Yeah, this part was hard to read.
During a multidisciplinary conference call, a psychiatrist is recorded literally saying that Frankie would be better off committing suicide.
And that if she did, it would be recorded as an accidental death.
Let that sink in for a second. A mental health professional, frustrated by a patient's advocacy, suggesting suicide as a convenient solution.
A solution that could be bureaucratically smoothed over. It is the ultimate expression of the system wanting to eliminate a perceived pathogen.
And it wasn't just horrific comments. They used the law as a weapon.
When Frankie challenged their clinical decisions with hard facts, she was subjected to threats of unlawful detention.
The sources mention specific sections of the UK Mental Health Act, Section 5(2) and Section 18.
For listeners unfamiliar with UK law, we need to define these clearly.
Yeah, please do.
Section 5(2) is a doctor's holding power. It allows them to involuntarily detain an informal patient in a hospital for up to 72 hours.
So if you try to leave because you feel the care is bad, they can just lock the door.
Yes. And Section 18 is even more severe.
What does that one do?
It deals with patients who are considered absent without leave, or AWOL. It grants powers to forcibly apprehend a patient and return them to the hospital.
The text details how these immense legal powers were dangled over Frankie, not for her safety, but as leverage to force her compliance.
When she continued to prove the clinicians factually wrong, the system escalated to stage 3, pathologization.
A social worker actually labeled her with Munchausen syndrome.
Munchausen is when someone fakes an illness to get attention, right?
Correct. It is a very severe psychiatric label.
But the author argues that Frankie wasn't faking an illness at all. She was demanding appropriate treatment for genuine trauma.
By labeling her with Munchausen, the institution successfully flipped the narrative.
Her intelligence, her meticulous record-keeping, and her advocacy were reframed as symptoms of a psychiatric disorder.
Her truth was literally buried under a medical diagnosis.
That is the 6-stage process operating perfectly.
And Frankie isn't an isolated case. The sources detail the heartbreaking trajectories of 2 other individuals, Charlotte and Gabs.
Charlotte's case involves multiple intersecting institutions. She suffered a sexual assault while serving in the military,
According to the sources, this assault was covered up by the military hierarchy.
which is the first layer of the web protecting itself. She subsequently turned to the NHS for trauma support.
But the NHS eventually abandoned her, labeling her case as too complex for their services.
Which is stage 4, system justification. We didn't fail her, she's just too difficult to treat.
Exactly. Left completely without support and pushed out of the institutional perimeter, Charlotte was later murdered.
The system's abandonment had actual fatal consequences.
And then there is Gabs. His engagement with the web came through the Child Maintenance Service, or CMS.
CMS is pretty notorious in the UK for its bureaucratic rigidity.
In Gab's case, the sources state he was hounded by the agency over a completely fictitious debt.
I really want to dwell on that for a second. We all know how stressful a random tax letter or a wrong bill can be.
Right, your heart drops.
Imagine a government agency with the power to garnish your wages or seize your assets deciding you owe them massive amounts of money.
and simply refusing to look at the evidence proving otherwise.
It is the ultimate gaslighting. You are holding the bank statements. You are holding the objective proof.
And the voice on the other end of the phone, or the automated letters arriving every week, they simply ignore reality.
The burden of proof is entirely inverted.
The sources document that Gabbs tried to fight it. He tried to present the evidence.
But the institutional machinery just ground him down over time.
The psychological pressure of fighting an entity that flat out refuses to acknowledge objective truth was just too much. He was driven to suicide.
The author frames both Charlotte and Gabbs as individuals who, tragically, lacked the conscious regulatory tools to survive the systemic gaslighting.
The tools of mental fitness we will discuss shortly.
Exactly. They were eliminated by the evolutionary selection pressure.
It's incredibly heavy. And the author doesn't stop there.
They zoom out to look at how the institutional web applies its power differentially across society.
They highlight a glaring two-tier justice system by contrasting two recent cases in the UK.
Again, we are looking purely at the mechanics of institutional protection and punishment here, analyzing the structural differences the author highlights between an ordinary citizen and a member of the political class.
The sources contrast the case of a woman named Lucy Connolly with a member of parliament named Mike Amesbury.
Lucy Connolly was given a 31-month prison sentence, 2.5 years.
What was her crime? A highly emotional, highly reactive, and undoubtedly inflammatory social media post made during a period of intense national tension.
From a psychological perspective, the author argues she was operating from a completely unregulated, purely emotional state.
A visceral reaction to a perceived societal threat.
But because she is an ordinary citizen outside the institutional perimeter, the web applied maximum punitive pressure.
31 months in prison for typed words.
Now contrast that with the MP, Mike Amesbury. He is an elected official. He sits inside the institutional web.
He was caught on high-definition video repeatedly punching a man, knocking him to the ground, and continuing to strike him. It was actual physical violence.
And the result?
A suspended 10-week sentence, meaning he served 0 actual jail time.
The author uses this stark contrast to prove a crucial point. The law is not a neutral arbiter of justice.
It is a tool used by the web. It favors and protects those with institutional power,
While aggressively criminalizing the raw, emotional, albeit flawed reactions of ordinary citizens, the perimeter protects its own.
We see this exact dynamic play out on a community level as well. The sources detail the Epping Bell Hotel case.
This is a textbook example of procedural deflection.
A local community had severe, legitimate safety concerns regarding a government policy that housed 138 asylum seekers in a local hotel.
Without adequate infrastructure or consultation with the town.
The community is experiencing genuine distress. They're raising an alarm based on their lived experience in their own town.
But instead of addressing the core human concerns like the fear, the strain on local resources, the breakdown of social trust, how did the institutions respond?
They used planning law to shut down the debate completely.
Right. The courts stepped in to protect the central government's policy, arguing over building permits and zoning technicalities instead of human safety.
It proves the system will use bureaucratic procedure to basically silence public opinion.
They changed the rules of the game so the citizens can't even play.
And finally, the author includes their own deeply personal experience. The author, Clive.
He was historically hired by large organizations specifically for his analytical skills.
Yep.
His job was literally to spot problems.
And he did. He identified severe health, safety, and legal violations within an institution.
He did exactly what society tells us to do. He saw something wrong, and he reported it through the proper official channels.
And the reward for his integrity. He triggered the immune response.
He was professionally blacklisted.
Yeah.
He was subjected to such intense retaliation that it resulted in suicide attempts and a diagnosis of CPTSD.
We should define CPTSD for the listener. That's complex post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes. While standard PTSD is often associated with a single, discrete traumatic event like a car crash or a combat incident,
CPTSD results from chronic, prolonged exposure to trauma from which the victim cannot escape.
it involves deep relational betrayal. Being systematically targeted and destroyed by an institution you trusted or worked for is a prime driver of CPTSD.
And after receiving this CPTSD diagnosis caused by the system, what did the NHS do for him?
Total abandonment, zero support. He was pushed out to stage 6.
This brings me to a massive question. If the law actually criminalizes this kind of institutional neglect, why is no one going to jail?
The sources specifically cite Section 127 of the UK Mental Health Act.
Section 127 is a fascinating piece of legislation. It explicitly makes it a criminal offense for anyone working in a hospital or mental health nursing home to ill-treat or willfully neglect a patient.
On paper, it is exactly the protection citizens need.
So why didn't the psychiatrist who told Frankie to commit suicide get prosecuted under Section 127?
Because, as the author synthesizes brilliantly, the enforcement mechanisms are entirely captured by the web.
The laws exist on the books just to give the illusion of accountability. But institutions will not prosecute themselves.
Who investigates the NHS? Other government bodies. Who prosecutes? The Crown Prosecution Service.
They're all nodes in the exact same web.
There is no truly independent oversight willing to bite the hand that feeds it.
This is the ultimate, undeniable proof of the deep dive's focus.
If you are inside the narrative, if you are an MP or a clinician, protected by the institutional perimeter, you are safe.
But if you step outside it, armed only with your lived experience, your opinion, and the objective truth, the web will crush you.
The situation, as laid out so far, seems incredibly bleak.
It really does. If institutions are fundamentally designed to suppress us, to pathologize our natural distress, and to protect themselves from accountability at all costs,
How on earth do we survive?
we can't just throw our hands up in despair. And this is where the sources pivot from diagnosis to treatment.
They offer a way out, but it requires a massive paradigm shift.
We have to move from a pathology paradigm, believing that we are sick and need a doctor to fix us, to an evolutionary paradigm.
This is the core of the author's solution: mental fitness and the upgraded operating system.
This is how you become a conscious resistor who actually survives.
What exactly is mental fitness, though? Because it sounds like a corporate wellness buzzword.
It really does, but it is the exact opposite. Mental fitness, in this framework, is a proactive daily discipline.
It replaces the current medical model of reactive crisis management.
It starts with one fundamental reframing that we discussed earlier. Your distress is not a broken brain.
It is an intelligent adaptation.
Yeah.
It is your nervous system doing exactly what it evolved to do, communicating information about threats in your environment.
So if I start having a panic attack because my workplace is abusive, I shouldn't think, oh no, my brain is malfunctioning.
No, you should think, my body is accurately processing a toxic situation.
Yes. And to navigate that without being destroyed by it, the author introduces the NCRM model.
Let's unpack that acronym. Notice, connect, regulate, manage.
The premise is that you must learn to operate your own nervous system rather than outsourcing that job to a psychiatrist or a pill.
You have to take control of the machinery.
To understand how to take control, the sources provide something called the life wobble framework.
This maps out the rapid unconscious circuit we all fall into when we are stressed. It's the anatomy of a freakout.
Exactly. Let's apply this directly to you, the listener. Think about the last time you got an ambiguous, potentially angry email from your boss at 4:55 p.m. on a Friday.
Just, we need to talk on Monday.
Oh, that is the worst. That is the trigger.
Right. That trigger instantly activates a memory. You remember the last time a boss said that to you and it ended poorly?
Or you remember a time you felt profoundly unsafe.
And that memory immediately sparks your imagination.
Because your brain is a prediction machine. So your imagination takes that memory and projects it into the future.
Usually imagining the absolute worst-case scenario. You picture yourself getting fired, losing your house, and living in your car.
Which generates a massive, intense emotion.
Yeah.
Panic, dread, anger.
And that emotion leads to a survival response. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
You might draft a furious resignation letter, or you might drink half a bottle of wine to numb the feeling.
That whole rapid cascading sequence trigger memory, imagination, emotion response is what the author calls the wobble.
It's the total loss of equilibrium.
And here is the critical point. When memory and imagination go unchecked in that loop, people self-medicate. They act out.
The goal of mental fitness is to consciously interrupt this loop before the wobble destroys your life.
It's about upgrading from a primitive OS where you are just a passenger at the mercy of this unconscious loop to an upgraded OS where you can actually hit pause.
I'm trying to think of a good way to visualize this. It's not like learning to drive a manual car. That's too simple.
Think about it like an airplane pilot dealing with a malfunctioning autopilot.
Okay, yes. You're flying a commercial jet. The autopilot system, your primitive unconscious brain, starts reading bad data from a faulty sensor.
It thinks you are stalling, so it violently pitches the nose of the plane down toward a mountain to pick up speed.
If you just sit there and trust the system, you crash.
Mental fitness is recognizing the bad data. It's having the training and the awareness to reach over, manually disengage the autopilot, grab the yoke, and fly the plane by the instruments.
You are consciously overriding the automatic survival response.
That is a brilliant analogy. And the specific instrument panel the sources highlight for flying the plane is borrowed from a clinical framework called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT.
It's a concept called wise mind chair work.
Let's break this down because this is the practical tool listeners can use today. It visualizes the mind in 3 distinct states.
First, imagine a chair representing the reasonable mind.
When you sit in this chair, you are operating entirely on cold facts, logic, and pragmatics.
It completely ignores intuition, physical sensations, and feelings.
It's like a computer. Or like buying a house based purely on the spreadsheet of resale value and commute times, while completely ignoring the fact that you feel miserable every time you walk through the front door.
It's useful for math, but terrible for human living.
Exactly. Then imagine the second chair, the emotional mind.
This state is hot, mood-dependent, and entirely reactive.
Yeah.
Logic, facts, and long-term consequences fly completely out the window.
This is where Lucy Connolly was operating when she typed out that social media post that got her 31 months in prison.
The emotion is real, the anger might even be justified by her environment, but the action is destructive because the reasonable mind is locked in the trunk.
The goal of mental fitness is not to eliminate either of these minds. The goal is to reach the third state, the wise mind.
This is the integration of both.
How does that actually feel in practice?
The wise mind acknowledges the raw emotion without being overwhelmed and controlled by it.
It says, I am feeling intense, valid terror right now because my boss sent that email. It validates the fire alarm.
But simultaneously, it honors the facts and logic of the situation. It says, the fact is, I have excellent performance reviews, and I'm not going to be fired on Monday.
It is the middle path. It is manually flying the plane.
By teaching people to access this wise mind, to notice their triggers, connect with their bodies, regulate their nervous systems, and manage their responses, you do something incredibly dangerous to the status quo.
You remove their need for the institution.
And that is exactly why this framework is inherently anti-institutional. The current institutional web relies entirely on dependency.
It needs you to believe you are sick so it can manage you. If you teach people to self-regulate, you threaten the pharmaceutical revenue models.
You threaten the funding of the bureaucracies that manage the mentally ill.
You shift the individual's identity entirely.
You are no longer a patient who is broken, defective, and needs fixing by an external authority.
You become an adapter. You are an intelligent organism that simply needs to upgrade its operating system to navigate a hostile environment.
Okay, let's bring all of this together. We have covered immense ground today.
We've traversed the grand illusion of modern mental health awareness, revealing how the language of healing is often used as a tool for control.
We've exposed the 6-stage institutional web that actively punishes truth-tellers, pathologizes natural human distress, and operates an immune response to protect its own power and evade accountability.
We've looked at the harrowing case studies of Frankie, Charlotte, Gabs, and Clive proof of how the system crushes those who challenge it with the truth.
And we've explored the NCRM tools of mental fitness, the vital skills needed to survive as a conscious resistor in an environment that is actively selecting against consciousness.
This matters to you, the listener, right now in your daily life, because your opinions, your physical reactions, and your lived experiences are valid data points. They are real.
Knowing that the system's default fire alarm response is to violently mute the bell rather than fight the fire gives you immense permission.
It gives you permission to trust your own intuition. It gives you the mandate to build your own regulatory skills, to learn how to fly the plane manually.
And most importantly, it gives you the right to absolutely refuse the label of being broken.
You are not a faulty alarm. The smoke in the room is real.
And before we sign off, we want to leave you with a final thought, something to really chew on that expands on everything we've unpacked today about power, dependency, and healing.
Think about this. The institutional web we've described relies entirely on our psychological dependency.
It relies on our collective belief that we are sick, fragile, and in need of their management to maintain its immense power, its legal authority, and its revenue.
So what happens to society? What happens to the power structures of the world if millions of people suddenly realize they were never sick to begin with?
And simply stop asking institutions for permission to heal.
What happens when the whole world learns how to manually override the autopilot?
Until next time, stay curious.